Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Archer's special event today, Hidden in Plain Sight, LGBTQI plus struggles across the Atlantic. This event is organized by Archer, American-Romanian Coalition for Human and Equal Rights. I'm Mihaela Campion, representing Archer, and I have the pleasure and honor to invite our guest speakers today, Jill Wolfe and Adrian Coman. Welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation today. Before we start, I would like to say a few words about the event and about our guest speakers. This is a conversation, very much needed conversation on struggles and wishes of the LGBTQI community, both here in the United States and also in Eastern Europe, respectively Romania. It's not only because it's Pride Month, it's because it's needed, it's important, and it requires awareness and attention from all of us. As I said earlier, the event is organized by Archer, American-Romanian Coalition for Human and Equal Rights, and our mission is to empower the members of diaspora to become active supporters and advocates of social justice and human rights in our communities. And now I would like to introduce our guest speakers. Jill Wolfe is a licensed clinical social worker in Chicago, Illinois. She serves also as the Director of Behavioral Health Services at Howard Brown Health, a federally qualified health center in Chicago. Howard Brown is a nonprofit organization that exists to eliminate the disparities in healthcare experienced by lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people through research, education, and the provision of services that promote health and wellness. Jill holds a Master of Social Work degree from the Catholic University of America, and she is trained clinically in treating survivors of trauma. Welcome, Jill, again, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Adrian Coman is a Romanian activist. He lives currently in New York with his husband, Clay, and he is one of the few, if not only, who advocated for LGBTQI community in Romania. I read a lot about you, Adrian. It's impressive. I don't even know where to start and where to end, but what's really important, and I hope we have a chance to talk about this today, is that you started several lawsuits against the Romanian government together with your husband, and you successfully presented your case at the European Court of Justice, which ruled, I think, based on your advocacy, the word spouse, referring to both heterosexual and homosexual couples in the context of European laws. You also served in different organizations. You have been the executive director of the Romanian LGBTQI organization Accept. You were also the acting director of the Baltic American Partnership Fund at the Open Society Institute, the program director at the Our Right International, and currently you serve at the International Social Justice Program at the Arcus Foundation, advancing human rights for LGBT people in New York. Thank you for being here. I'm very honored and pleased to talk to you. And yeah, I'm just eager to start.
Thank you. So am I, and thank you to Archer. And I think in short, I am just one of many Romanian activists these days on these issues.
That's great. That shows progress, and that's why we are here today, to acknowledge, recognize progress, and also to be honest in terms of what continues to be needed in order to accomplish our missions, right? Few words before we dive into the conversation. As I said earlier, for those who are with us live, we are live on Facebook, but this conversation is going to also be posted later on YouTube and other social media. So in case you are with us now, feel free to ask questions and make comments in the comment section of this video. If you have anything to share with us later, feel free to do so, and our guest speakers will try to respond to your questions now or later. We are going to leave about 10-15 minutes, depending on how many questions we have and comments. We leave this time at the end of the conversation, and Raresh, our editor at Archer, will present those questions to the guest speakers. So I think we are ready to start. We are going to have a conversation on the needs, struggles, and wishes of the LGBTQI communities here and across the Atlantic. And why did we decide to do that? I think we have a tendency as humans to be caught up in our bubble, right? We kind of know what's happening. We know our surroundings, and sometimes we lose perspective on how many things happen outside our own environment, our familiar environment. The struggles that some communities, including the LGBTQI community, are common. And I think that requires some examination to understand why is that happening, to also gain new perspectives, how much progress has been made in one place, how much another places may learn from those places where progress has been made. It's a conversation of sharing and understanding the needs and the struggles and also the wishes. I think it's very important to look into what do we want, where we want to be, what do we want to accomplish with this kind of presentations and dialogues that we are having here. So I'm going to just ask the first question, and I hope both of you will jump in and answer. What's common? What do you think is common in terms of, activism, struggles, needs, wishes in the LGBTQI community here in the United States and Eastern Europe, and particularly Romania? No order in answering questions.
I'll go first, seeing Jill's sign to me.
Okay.
I think here and there and everywhere around the world, we are talking about LGBTQI people. So people who are different or are perceived to be different from perspective of sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristic, gender. It is a fight to be full human beings in society with a fully recognized human dignity and rights. And these are big words, but at the very, very high level, that is, I think, what we are talking about. And I think the fight and the developments are similar. They are just in different places from the perspective of where the hearts and minds of people are, and therefore where the law and public opinion is. And I do want to say at the beginning that I was happy for the invitation that you made for me, because this month, it's Pride Month, of course, but for the places that I belong to, it has a particular meaning. In Romania 20 years ago, in June, the criminal law was repealed. And Romania's criminal law was the last one in Europe to be repealed. It was a law according to which consenting adults, in same-sex relations could have been punished to prison. So I want to say that to see where we started in the sphere of the criminal law, and we're gonna get towards family and civil rights later. Then in New York, where I am, 10 years ago, the Assembly of the State of New York adopted the same-sex marriage law. It wasn't the first one in the US, but it was the largest state who did it. And it was a tipping, in that context on this topic of same-sex marriages that happened. And for me personally, June is the month when I met a wonderful person, Clay Hamilton, who is my husband since 2010. And we have 19 years together.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Yes, and I think I would just follow up with that, Hyla, in terms of wishes. I mean, for the LGBTQ community, I think that there's, like anyone, the wish to be accepted and belong, have both equity and equality, and inclusion, to the point where maybe there's a time that coming out, whatever that might mean, around gender identity or sexuality, isn't necessary because that acceptance is there. I think it's funny to think on like a Saturday Night Live improv skit that part of a satire are people having to come out as being heterosexual. And it makes us laugh because it's like, oh, imagine a situation where someone would need to come out about being cisgender or heterosexual. So I think that there's a general overarching wish that there wasn't this need for this. I think a general wish as we get to that point where we don't maybe need to come out is that people will do the work and get comfortable getting uncomfortable about understanding bias and potential places where discrimination happens. And, I can speak from a social justice lens working at a federally qualified health center in Chicago, is that a wish we have is that people understand this freedom, if we want to call it that, is really contingent on other groups who are also discriminated against getting access and freedom. And so, LGBTQ lives will matter only when Black lives will matter, and Asian lives, and etc. And so we are all in this together. And the wish, I think, at least from me, knowing LGBTQ folks are not a monolith, that we're looking for, peace and acceptance to all. Big wish there on a Friday, but I can dream, can't I?
But it's a human wish. I'm not, sometimes I wonder, why do we have to talk about this? Where did it all started? Why? Why as humans we cannot accept equality as is, and we need to differentiate based on all these criterias, which to me they seem to be very unfair, but somehow they serve some special interest. So let's not get into that too much, because it's probably going to be too big for us here. But I would like to address a question to Adrian and hear his perspective of what does it mean to be open in terms of your, sexual orientation, live in the Romanian diaspora and openly accept and be comfortable or not, I'm not sure, I cannot make assumptions, to be part of the Romanian community, but also, to talk about your activism for LGBTQI rights.
Yeah, I think there are various Romanian diasporas. Yeah, if you go to various churches in New York, there will be one diaspora. If you go to the Romanian Film Festival in December in New York City, there will be another diaspora. Of course, some people will be in both places, but I think based on what the place is, one can feel, different. I would first say that I came out while I lived in Romania, and I immigrated to the US in 2002. And to me, the courageous act was to come out in Romania, not in the US. I did that early on, and I remember the moment. It was January 1998 on one of the main TVs. And I think at the time in particular, I was one of the very few who did it. And I think I did it because I was tired of lying. I had to lie a lot of people that I cared about, my mother in particular. And I realized that for many, there was no need to lie to them, that I may also be a lucky case, but I actually benefited from a lot of love and acceptance and support from my parents and others around me. And of course, these things helped me, be an activist and move forward with these plans. But in New York, we do benefit from, it's a whole world, very open, with a lot of legal protection, of course, with people of many, many kinds. But I think if there's one place in the world where you can be who you are, that is probably New York City.
I would say the same thing for Chicago. And Jill is with me on this, but definitely we completely understand that New York, it's the right place to be, especially coming from the struggles that you encountered, in Romania. I think it's really, it's so hard. I mean, I cannot even, make more comments about that. Jill, I want to ask you, how is the healthcare system? Is there any, in your observation and your experience, you are a social worker, you also have a private practice, you work with trauma. What's your observation and your experience when it comes to accessibility to the healthcare system, the treatment received? I also work with a few, but you are very much involved in the community. So I'm thinking, as someone who is transgender and, needs to go for special medical treatment, and how is that perceived, received, and treated?
Yeah, thank you for that. A lot of it depends on where you are in the country, and even there, what kind of access you have in terms of insurance. In terms of Illinois, I believe it was January 2020, Medicaid made available gender-affirming surgeries and processes and coverage of those to people who are transgender. And so it certainly opened up access. However, policy is one thing and practice is another. And so what that looks like on the ground are a lot of providers who don't know the first thing about how to provide preventative or culturally competent care that's respectful of someone's pronouns, let alone what they might present as, and if they're, taking hormone replacement therapy or whatnot. So I think what this means for someone who is part of the LGBTQ community, knowing that even just those letters together are bringing together folks based on both gender and sexual identities, and those are different. And so the experience of someone who's identified as gay or bisexual will have one set of experience with a whole other set of challenges for someone whose gender identity is not what's consistent with what our culture is comfortable with. So what that means is, the consistent question of, will I be accepted and safe in the place I'm getting care from? If I visually to everyone look like a presenting male presenting, and they say my name and they don't honor my chosen name or pronouns, and they refer to me by my birth name, or as some people might say, their dead name, that can be really humiliating. That can be really, challenge to someone's mental and emotional state. And so there's this constant evaluation of, do I need to hide my identity? Is it safe to be me? I can tell you that I use she, they pronouns. I identify as a cis woman, which means that my gender presentation matches the assigned gender I was given at birth. And, even just looking maybe a little bit more androgynous, I'm often misgendered. And there are times when I go to the doctor and I have really good health insurance with relative easy access. I find that my tool, and this is just based on who I am, is humor. And so despite the fact that, these questions that are asked to me about if I'm pregnant or different possibilities of this, despite some other ways we can ask this, I always respond around the question of pregnancy as I say, well, she's not that good. And it always catches the provider like, ooh, oh my gosh, well, and hopefully just kind of pay attention that as a provider, we have opportunities to think about the questions we're asking and how we're asking them. So I hope that answers your question, Mihaela. I mean, there's so much to cover in that, but someone who identifies as of the trans community or LGBTQ community, there are things that come into our minds, just whether or not we're going to be treated with equity or equality for that matter.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there is a lot that we still need to learn as providers and, doctors to be educated more in terms of how to relate to patients, no matter what, right? But you also
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
Mihaela, I'm sorry to, as you say that, I'm thinking there are some really easy, low-hanging fruit that people listening or have access to being able to make these small changes of just language is really powerful. And instead of saying husband or wife, you could easily replace that with partner, and it's much more inclusive. I'm thinking about, I've heard providers really well-meaning saying, well, there's male, female identified, we should put a box of other. Well, other? I mean, even just that language in itself, like they're not other, they're trans male or trans female or non-binary, and what does this mean? So I think that there's some low-hanging fruit that we can bite by bite get through this. I'm sorry to have interrupted you,
yeah,
but
no, that's great. I think that's what we need to hear. How much language matters and how our awareness can help, make those tweaks, because we all need to do that. No matter how aware we are. So this is something that we experience a lot in the United States. I wonder, what are the issues across the ocean? What do people confront with when it comes to LGBTQI communities' rights? if you can, educate us a little bit here, Adrian, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Again, I think we're looking at the law and the public opinion in terms of what are we when it comes to inclusion in society. And I have prepared a little to show you where we are in comparison with other countries in Europe. I'm hoping that you can see my screen with the trans rights map.
Yes, we can.
This is a map done by a wonderful organization called Transgender Europe, TGU. And every year they update this map to illustrate the protection of trans people in Europe. And as it shows, the darker the color, the higher the protection. And it goes from 0 to 30, and based on what a country has in terms of tools or of policy and law. And you see Romania, unfortunately, it is very white. It has only one of the 30 measures identified by TGEU. In short, in Romania, a person can change a name and a gender marker, but it is a court-based process that can be very long and very abusive. The judge, for instance, can ask for certificates from a physician or a psychologist that would attest that the person is ready. While in reality, these processes, as TGEU educates us, should be based on one's self-determination. One knows, who one is, and the government would just recognize that. So it has to be a simple process, like going to a notary and making a statement. And that should be sufficient to identify who you are in terms of name and a gender marker. I would also say that there is a European Court of Human Rights decision against Romania from January this year that basically says that in order for the right to private life of trans people in Romania to be observed, the government has to implement these policies in relation to the name and gender marker recognition. If we are looking at LGBT people in Europe, I am going to share now my screen and show you another map on this topic. This map comes from another umbrella organization called ILGA Europe. And just like TGU, they looked at various references in legislation, such as, is there protection against discrimination? If yes, is it in the Constitution or is it only in the civil law? Is there recognition of same-sex families? If yes, is it at the level of marriage or partnership or de facto recognition? And what you see on the map is a categorization of countries based on these various criteria. And you see there that Romania with 19% is unfortunately among the least observing from this perspective. Please note that even the Republic of Moldova, which is not in the European Union, has 20%. And Romania is actually number 38 of the 49 countries that are screened there. And what I want to point on this map that doesn't get noticed is that let's look at Malta and see 94%, right? This is a wonderful country that I've been to twice. It was a bastion of Catholic faith and its link to politics, And look at it now, and I think it shows that we are talking about social construction. It is man-made, basically, this reality, and it can change. It's all up to us and political will to be doing it. And if you give me 2 more minutes, if this is very rushed through what the law is, there's also the other side of what public opinion is. And in short, in Romania, unfortunately, the law is way behind public opinion. What we do know is that there was a public, there are various opinion polls done periodically, but the one that is the most recent that I found is from this spring. It was commissioned by one of the main LGBT groups in Romania called Accept. And it looked at these three things in Romanian on the screen: values, marriage, and LGBT people. And among the findings, we have 43% of people, of respondents, who agreed with either same-sex marriage or a legal form of recognition in society. Now, if you are the politician, you may want to say, okay, it's not 51, or you may want to say it is 43, and I recognize the direction which society goes. And it is my role as a leader in that society, not to wait until people are ahead of me, but to be in the leadership, right? The same opinion poll found that 62% of respondents agree that everyone deserves respect, and that includes LGBT people specifically. So again, that is something that if one wants, can see it there. And the last thing that I would point out from that opinion poll is that 19 people of respondents said that they knew someone who was LGBT or T person. So that obviously it's a low percentage for, how much open Romania is, how much these issues are discussed, from the media to social media. And I think it goes back to, the coming out, which is very important. It shouldn't be a burden, right? Like it shouldn't be, again, everything on our shoulders to educate society. But it is a vicious circle if coming out doesn't happen. And on that sense, I am very happy because with young people, they don't go through the struggle that my generation did. I'm turning 50 this year, just to speak in clear terms. And, when I grew up in the communist regime in particular, there was the word coming out didn't exist at the time.
Very true. We didn't have even a translation for that because there was no notion for it, correct? There was no concept for such thing. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm wondering, you presented Malta. I've been to Malta, I loved it. But that's another story. What can we learn from a place like this who jumped so much in terms of, acceptance and inclusion? What would be some of the, the learning points for everybody? And I don't know if we have anything like this in the States that you know of, Jill, like this kind of, progress, this kind of, jump from being enclosed to being open.
I mean, I know that, in the United States, in 27 states, there are, no explicit statewide laws that protect people from discrimination on the basis of their sexual or gender orientation, especially when it comes to from employment to housing to public accommodations and whatnot. So there's still a lot of advocacy to go in terms of, the states that kind of lead the way. We're looking at the coasts, so California to Massachusetts and, Vermont and things like this. So generally the 27 states that do not have the statewide laws are generally concentrated in the south and the mid part of the country, middle part of the country. So it's not surprising when you look at politics, some of what my friend here, Adrian, was talking about in terms of public opinion and laws. These are all obviously work together. So lot of work still to be done.
I would add on Malta that because it is a small country, basically around 300,000 people, everyone really matters. Like votes really matter. There are two main parties there, a more conservative one and a more liberal one. And some years, I think it's a decade ago almost, when the conservative one lost, it lost also because the more liberal party has courted the votes of LGBT people, and it's basically a country where 1,000 votes can change the majority in parliament. And then once they came to power, they kept the promises. There is a wonderful lady who was the the Ministry of Social Labor and Social Protection, and who was charged with the legal reform. So it went to recognition of same-sex relations, the same for gender identity. Malta was the first country in Europe to adopt a law to protect intersex people. And this wonderful lady is now European Union's Commissioner for Equality. So here is how the small, respectful liberal recognition in this country can now have a European-wide impact.
Yeah, something to be inspired with, I think, and to continue to believe. I think that's, keeping these hopes up. I think it's very important when we see that it's possible, when it happens somewhere, when we see it, we get that inspiration and we continue our activism for equal rights. I also want to ask you, Adrian, what was the impact on your activism, going to the European courts, European community courts? What was the impact in other countries in the region? As we know, after the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, many of the countries, Romania included, but also former Soviet Union, have, turned into, there were a lot of things happening, right, after the collapse of communism, but also when we experience this opening up of multiple possibilities of human rights, of equal rights, there was also a tendency to regroup and to become more enclosed, to somehow protect what we call the traditional values, or values in general. And with these kind of movements that you have been part of for this long, I wonder how that affected other countries in the region.
Yes, thank you. I realize that I haven't really explained fully where we are in Romania on these issues, and I think I will attempt again a very rushed, historical, unjust presentation. So if in 2001 Romania abolished the criminal law, also it adopted an anti-discrimination law that had sexual orientation, but not also gender identity among non-discrimination grounds. These two legal measures were adopted in the context of the European Union enlargement. So Romania had to do it, basically, in order to meet the political criteria to join the European Union. And joining the European Union was the thing that opened all doors in late 90s. And that, I think, is the main explanation for that legal change. Once Romania was in the European Union, it didn't move anymore. Around 2008-9, it amended the civil code in order to rule out same-sex marriages and civil partnership, which were not possible anyway at the time, because the civil code was very specific in terms of who could marry who. Nevertheless, as a result of the conservative movements which are active around the world, and they are even, you certainly read about the gender and anti-gender ideologies. This is a conservative a movement with funding from the US, from Russia, which basically acts in the pure meaning of the term conservative, to keep things as they are. And that means, to amend constitutions, in Eastern Europe, in this case, in order to rule out same-sex marriage, which is not possible anyway, to adopt all sorts of discrimination in law against transgender people, and these things, have been attempted in Romania too. One result was, as I said, the amendment of the civil code. But in 2018, Romania had a referendum to amend the constitution in order to rule out same-sex marriage. And what is amazing is that only 21% of the people with the right to vote showed up in that referendum. Therefore, it was not valid. And it was something that the arrogant, politicians and Orthodox Church who were behind it did not expect. And I think it's another measure of how ordinary people rejected discrimination when it came in that institutionalized form. And then in that context, my husband and I, and my spouse and I, as Jill has rightly pointed out, and Accept, this organization in Romania, we went to court because the government refused to consider a legal residence for Clay, my spouse, in Romania based on our marriage from Belgium. It basically said Romania doesn't recognize same-sex marriages. It is in the civil code. So he is not your spouse in Romania. So we went to court in a very long and complex legal process, which has not yet ended. But what we have obtained so far is a decision from the Court of the European Union, which basically said that for EU law, spouses are spouses regardless of their gender. And Romania had to recognize Clay as your spouse for that purpose of a legal residence, because it has to do with the free movement within the European Union. And one country doesn't get to decide. It is an EU law and principle. Then we went to the Romanian Constitutional Court, which for the first time affirmed that same-sex couples do have the same right to private life and to family, just like heterosexual couples. However, the government didn't implement those decisions, and we are now before the Court of Last Resort, which is the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and we're expecting a decision within a year. A decision that would basically affirm that there has to be a form of legal recognition of same-sex couples in Romania. And back to your question, which was about what the impact was in other countries in the region, there was one. First of all, in the European Union, of the 27 states, 22 already recognize spouses for the purpose of legal residence. for instance. And interestingly, even some of the countries that are in the news lately, like Hungary, Hungary does recognize this right that Romania does not, just does other kind of discrimination, unfortunately. So we are talking about 6 countries that don't have any form of legal recognition in the European Union for same-sex couples. And the decision from the European Union's court in our case did lead to further decisions in these countries, which are Lithuania, Poland, and Bulgaria.
That's amazing. That's progress, right? I think it's great when we hear these kind of things happening, although we would like not to have to deal with them in the first place. But I think it's important to look at and to trust that that activism works. I think it's very important because it's really hard. I think those who are activists, and you are more than me in this case, both of you, but we know how much it takes to to sustain your work for a good cause, and how many barriers we usually encounter when we do that, and not to feel discouraged and continue to believe in the cause. So that's wonderful. So there is some impact, there is some progress, and there is also work to be done. I'm hearing from both of you on both sides of the Atlantic. I want to return to you, Jill, and ask you a question. I mean, it's a report that I recently read, and it says that mental health concerns run 5 to 8 times higher among LGBT youth than heterosexual youth. In a national study, 40% of transgender adults reported having made a suicide attempt. 90% of these individuals reported having attempted suicide before the age of 25. LGBT youth who come from highly rejected families are 8.4 times as likely to have attempted suicide as LGBT peers who reported no or low levels of family rejection. I find that to be a very interesting study, and I'm glad that it has been done. What can you say about that? What have you encountered in your work and your experience in regard to the danger of suicide, and also the difference that family support makes in mental health, youth in particular?
Yeah. Outside of genetics, of course, as humans, we're pack animals, right? And we want to belong. And so not just only the most important, of course, in our family and the places that we come from, but when we don't get that, that's an additional insult, an additional trauma that sets this developing person up for ongoing anxiety and vulnerabilities that really don't need to be present, right? Especially when you look at that data about well-supported and accepted young people are going to grow up just the same relative normal trajectory as those who are not LGBT and in accepting families. So, I think that speaks to the power of, in this case, the parents or the caretakers to really work on their own stuff and biases to really provide some space to keep their loved one healthy as they can be. Life is hard, whether you are gay or you're not. And being gay shouldn't have to be one of those reasons. Being trans, being whatever gender, sexual identity shouldn't have to be one of those reasons that life is hard. And I think that it is, given where we are, and there's just so much we can do to accept people where they are and let them know who they are is perfect and okay. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mihaela. There's so much opportunity to really let someone be who they are and explore self in the safest way possible. Adrian, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but you know, coming out is not just a one-time event. You know, it's over and over. So hopefully your family gives you that. It's your family that first time. Hopefully they give you a good experience. So
I think I'm going back to opinion polls. And there is, there's a European Union agency called Fundamental Rights Agency, and every 2 years they do surveys and studies. And there is one specific to LGBT. So what I hope you can see on the screen is from last year. There's a question of, do you avoid holding hands in public with the same-sex partners for fear of being assaulted, threatened, or harassed? And we can see that what the responses are: always 30%, often 31%. That is already more than the majority. And I think it speaks to how comfortable, one can be in society. And from someone reminded me just a few days ago, she used the word anxiety just for living, in that context.
Yeah. Thank you for this parallel observation and sharing. I think it's self-explanatory, right? If we don't feel safe, if we don't feel accepted, if we don't feel secure with others, then naturally we are going to hide and to close off. This is a natural human response to rejection and unacceptance. I'm circling continuously around this, what can be done? I have this.
Well, maybe we can look explicitly at what the good news is. What's the positive part, right? What do we see going forward? So what I would say is that we see politicians, which is rare in Romania, some politicians that really take it as their cause, to fight for equality and human rights, and specifically for LGBT people. They're not many, and they tend to come from one newer party. But they do exist, from the Romanian parliament to the Romanians in the European Parliament. We see the public opinion changing for the better and fast. When I left Romania in 2002, about 85%, I remember, of respondents would say that they would not want a homosexual among their neighbors. And now, remember the figures that I just provided before. We are at 62% who say that everyone should be respected, including LGBT people. Yes, it's 20 years, but 20 years is historically a short time. It's not a long time. So yes, public opinion is changing. I think it has to do with the opening in our society, with joining the European Union, with being able to travel without visas, right? With young people today have access to Erasmus scholarships to study in other EU member states, to all sorts of exchanges, to see the world, in a different way. I think the agency that one has, in society is very, very different. So I am actually very optimistic, even if a lot of the data that I provided is somber. But I think when we look at the course, I think it is, we are on the right course. It is just a matter of time to see more and more measures of equality. But I don't want to say that we can just sit back and watch. So I don't believe in natural order. You know, everything is social construction. It depends on what we do and what we don't do.
I couldn't agree more. And to that, with that spirit, I have hope when I see my young nieces and nephews who, you know, have just accepted pronouns and understanding of gender and sexuality in a way that, you know, my generation and, you know, before have had a really hard time historically. So that there's a lot of hope there. And, you know, I think on an individual level, we all have our own work to do. And we can learn about what it means to be someone who is different if you're not, right? It means being open and doing the work and the homework around this exploration. I think that what's powerful is exploring our own biases and with others who may share in similar biases and kind of chew on that to really in a safe enough space to explore that. I think that part of what we can do is know that pride and LGBTQ related issues extend well beyond June, just like issues related to racism and you know, and Black history extends way beyond February. And just like Women's History Month extends way beyond that month, right? These are all really important things that live on and continue. So those are the things that we can do individually on a one-on-one basis that really does have a huge, huge impact.
Yeah, thank you for that. I cannot agree more with what both of you have said. And you know, when we think of rejection, because that seems to be the common thread, rejection comes from fear. So, as you said, Jill, if we explore our own fears, we may actually contribute more to making that, you know, moving forward, that type of progress that we are all starving for. I would like to take 1 second here and remind to those who are watching with us today that in case you have comments or questions, feel free to post them in the comment section of the video. We will respond to them at the end of our conversation. So in case you joined later, not from the beginning, you know, please do so if you have questions and comments. So we talked about a few things. I think it's just a drop, right, in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean. But I think it's so important to look at the history. We have two different histories on two different continents. I consider United States to be a continent, right? It's probably the size of Europe, if not bigger. I don't know exactly in terms of, you know, the size, but definitely I know Illinois is as big as a country in Europe. So, so we looked at the struggles, we've seen commonalities, and we've focused a little bit on what can be done. And I would like to continue on that path and ask both of you, where do you see the communities going? What would strengthen the LGBTQI communities, both here and in Europe, in particular, Eastern Europe? And with the risk of repeating ourselves, I think it's still really important for everybody to hear and learn what can be done, you know, how we can all contribute, and where do you see the communities going?
Hopefully we're moving closer together. I just sort of on the last couple of minutes here, I think it's us working for each other's rights across the way. I don't know. I'm just curious what your last thoughts on this, Adrian, are, because I'm sure you have them.
Well, I don't live there, obviously, so I know a lot less about what happens at the community level. Of course, I read about the work of the organizations in Romania and Eastern Europe, and professionally, I get to conferences and other events. What we see is an explosion of ideas and an exploration of leader projects, of community events that have to do with visibility, with the affirmation of all sorts of identities, of the diversity that we have in our communities. I see groups and individuals searching for funding, for political capital. A wonderful trans woman stood in local elections, or tried at least to make it on the ticket in Bucharest, which is absolutely amazing. And I really hope that she will stand again in the next elections, because I think we do need to be involved in all level of society, and represented everywhere, including in politics. I actually attempted that myself. I joined the political party in 2018, and I participated in the primaries for that party for the European Parliament. Anyway, it was a great lesson, big failure, but that's how one learns. I was probably too naive to think that it would be that easy, but it was a great lessons learned.
Yeah, that's great. And as Jill said earlier, I think we need to continue beyond Pride Month. This is an ongoing activism. And I congratulate both of you for everything you do, and I wish you good luck. So I think, without having any questions posted yet, which doesn't mean they are not going to come later, I hope, we will somehow, I think we will conclude here. And I would like to thank you both for joining Archer in this conversation, and to wish you good luck in everything you do, and to continue to be active and vocal for the good cause of equal rights for LGBTQI communities here and in Europe. Thank you.
I highly really appreciate focusing on this, and open to any questions after the event. So, Adriana, it was nice to spend some time with you.
Same here. Yes. A pleasure and an honor to be in this space with you all.
Thank you so much. So goodbye, everybody. We will close here, and we hope to see you at our next event soon.